welcome to episode 19 of On My Studio Table. Today, as you can see, I have decided to do things a little differently. What I've done is I've opened the cupboard behind me so you can see what's in it. The top shelf, of course, features lots of different magazines and books, and then the other shelves have an assortment of things, including books and other things that I use from time to time. There are also two drawers in the bottom of this cupboard, and that's where I keep my vintage paper supplies, things like old sheet music, tissue paper from old dressmaker patterns, sheets from old dressmaker patterns, old dictionaries, thesaurus, and all sorts of things like that that I use in my collage. I also have different papers that I use in my eco-printing on the bottom shelf, which you can't really see, and some of my stamps and other things that I use for embellishment. So it's not a huge cupboard, but it does hold a lot, and it's been very useful to me. In the other part of the studio I have black metal shelves, and they hold baskets and bins full of materials, and I have promised that I will do a studio tour one day. The table I'm sitting at actually is where I do my hand stitching, but it also has my machine for machine stitching, some threads that I save from when I'm sewing so that I can use them for needle felting. I did have my needle felting machine on this table also, but it just took up too much room when I wanted to spread out, so that's on a shelf. But I get that down when I need it. And I will need it soon because of the triptych that I'm working on. In this episode, I'm also going to show you the Quilting Arts magazine, which published my article in the current issue, which is the summer issue. We're actually in spring, and the Northern Hemisphere is in autumn now, but this came out for the summer. And I have it here to show you because it arrived in the mail. So I will do that shortly in this video. But I also thought you might be interested to know that this is not the first time I've been published. I have been published over the years in several magazines, so I've got them down off the shelf and I thought I would show you them in this video. What I will do is show you the cover of the magazine, which is the current one. Hopefully your newsagent where you live locally has a copy of this, but if not, you can buy it online. You can also access a digital copy, and I'll share both links in the description under the video. The other thing is that I have another small quilt in this magazine also, one of my 2 Wellsprings quilts, so a little bit more about that also. Finally, I am going to share with you my latest journal page, which I know many people look forward to, and my art quilt, which I've been working on for quite some time and which has featured in several of the recent videos. And I'm well on the way to finishing it as I'm recording this, and I'm hoping that by the time this video comes out I will have finished it and I can show you as part of this video. I actually added a lot more stitching since the last video, which I didn't totally intend to, but it just seemed to need it. And including something a little bit different, which I have shared on social media, but didn't tell you about here as yet. But I will later in this video. So I hope you enjoy what I've got to share with you this time. Thank you so much for joining me. I so appreciate the wonderful comments that people have been putting underneath my videos, and it's just been so encouraging and affirming, and thank you so much. summer edition of Quilting Arts for 2024. And as you can see, there's a lovely quilt on the cover also, and the magazine is packed full of amazing work, which is lovely to see. Just going to share with you the quilt of mine that appeared in the Reader's Challenge. Now, this was an invitational challenge, so not everybody could enter this. People were actually invited to be a part of this, and I was quite amazed to receive an email inviting me to submit something. So I submitted both Wellsprings 1 and Wellsprings 2. This is actually Wellsprings 2, but there is a bit of a misprint here because they've called it Wellsprings 1. However, the description is the same for both of the quilts. So I just thought I would let you know, because if you've been watching this on social media, you might get confused as to which one this actually is. I have let them know that it's not the right title, so hopefully they will put an amendment in the next issue. But I'm just very happy to have my work featured in this magazine. And when I turn the page, you come to my article. And as you can see, it's about using tea bags for fibre art. And they featured my work, which I sent them photos of, so they're actually my photos. I wrote the article using their guidelines, and they actually gave me quite a lot of support because it was tricky fitting in with their guidelines for this. And it was quite a challenge to do, but I'm pleased that I did it. I have written for this magazine before, and I've been published in this magazine before, but this I found quite challenging, doing this article. However, I'm happy that it's in the magazine. Unfortunately, there are a couple of problems with this as well, which I've also emailed Quilting Arts about. But I have to say, it's just wonderful to have my work in the magazine. So on this photo here of a quilt made of tea bags, there is a black mark on it, which must have happened in printing. So that's a quality control issue, I think. So I have mentioned that to Quilting Arts. The other thing is that there is a photo which is wrongly described, which is this photo here. These are described as stitched tea bags, but they're actually stitched fusible wadding. And I have a bit of tea bag showing in the corner, which is the actual tea bag that was supposed to be in the description. So again, I have asked them if they will do something in the next issue to correct that. But otherwise, the article is good to go, and if you have never tried using tea bag papers in your artwork, I have been really thorough, I think, in describing how you do that, and different ways to use them, and also even to dye them with natural dyes. So I hope you enjoy it, and that some of you will go and buy this issue. This Quilting Arts magazine came out in 2023, and this was another challenge, and it was called Art is a Bridge. So I submitted this piece, and I based it on the fact that a bridge is sometimes what we need to keep communities together. So it's about commitment and perseverance, especially if relationships are difficult. So that's what this is about, and it features some of my earth painted papers and stitching, also a tea bag incidentally, and this was my interpretation. It's an abstract interpretation, but I've used curved shapes to represent bridges, particularly a very old bridge that's in Tasmania called the Richmond Bridge, which you might want to Google, and that has curved arches in it, and it's made of stone. This goes back quite a way. This magazine came out in 2008, I think, and some of my work appears in this. And you'll see that the tea bag quilt has been featured before, plus some of my other quilts. This was before I really got into eco-dyeing, so I was using a lot of scrap fabrics, a lot of used fabrics. So this one in particular has a lot of fabrics from clothing and other found fabrics that I found in thrift shops. And then also some hand-dyed fabrics, some that I did and some that I bought. There's another piece made with tea bags, which was a 3D piece. This one is made of wool, and you know how much I like wool, and this was one of my early experiments using wool. All of these are my own design. I didn't use other people's designs, they're my own designs. This one is very special. I made this one in memory of my mum. So she died of cancer. I started it before she died and I finished it after she died. This one, for obvious reasons, I called Pizzazz. So that was lovely to have a feature in the magazine. This one actually features some work that I did with hand-painted fabrics using commercial dyes. Again, I had started some eco-dyeing and printing, but I hadn't done a lot, and I think I was in the crossover period. And when you open it, you'll see that I did a quilt with hand-painted fabrics, and I did stamping as well, and I did a journal to go with it. And these described a visit to Maria Island based on some photos that I took. And this was based on a photo of a ruined hospital on Maria Island. Maria Island is on the east coast of Tasmania. And this shows you some views of the book and also some of the photos that inspired the work. And you'll see references to that in the book and also with the quilt. That quilt actually went to Houston as part of a group display organised by Lisa Walton. This was an article that I was paid to write. I put in a proposal and they accepted it, and it's called Intuitive Hand Stitching. Now I also have a course that I run online called Intuitive Stitching, and the class has just finished. I opened it for a second time, and we're just in the middle of doing some Zoom sessions to close off the course. But I described dyeing and rusting and using hand stitching. So that was great to have that article. And the feature artwork was called Lost and Found. And I rusted and dyed the fabrics and also used found objects such as rusty bottle caps, which I still use in my work. This is a magazine which went for many years called Down Under Textiles, and I'm so disappointed that it no longer exists, but it's a great magazine, so if you ever find old issues of it, it's well worth it. I was actually published in a two-part article for this one, and I called them Collaborating with Nature, and that's still in my about statement on my webpage at gonerustic.com, because I feel that's what I do. You'll see me looking quite a bit younger there, and lots of examples of my eco printing, including a quilt that I made that also folds up to become a book, a dress that I did eco printing, and just it was lovely to be featured in this article. Also a small art quilt which was in a touring exhibition. So that was the first part. And then the second part was published in the next issue. So there's the cover. And it had lovely Australian work in it. It was really great to see Australian work showcased. And again, some of my eco printing, I often use rusty nails, and they really feature in this top. And I love using rusty metal also for paper, which these feature. And some of the strings that I use to tie up my bundles also dye, so I did make some rose brooches at one point. And there is some more eco printing. There's a vessel which I made from eco printed paper and crocheted paper yarn. This one features a fern print, which I still love to do, and a top, or actually two tops that I eco printed. And it's just great that they featured this in this magazine. That was a dress that I made and eco-printed, and that was a cardigan that I eco-printed, and a couple of bundles. I think they look like vintage slips actually, because vintage nylon actually does print very well. This is not the last, but it's the last one I'll be showing you today. This is another Down Under Textiles magazine, and this featured the 2017 quilt show. If you saw the video a few videos back of the Island Quilts quilt show for this year, you would know what I'm talking about. But Island Quilts is the Tasmanian Quilting Guild exhibition, which is held annually, and there is my book quilt published in the magazine as part of the feature about island quilts, and this won first place in the art quilt section. This is my art quilt, and as I'm filming this segment, it is almost finished. I have done all the faced edges, I've added lots of stitching, I've attached these layers here, I've added some couching, and if I move it up, you'll see also that I've added some circles and some buttons. Now the circles are done in a particular way which I didn't know about until recently, and I learned that from American artist Ariane Zurcher, and I'll put a link to her channel underneath this. She's a wonderful textile artist, well actually a mixed media artist, but she loves using stitch, and she does some stitch demonstrations. And this one involves a ring of chain stitches and then satin stitch over the top. And what I did was I used some wool thread in these sort of peachy colours, and also merino wool thread in shades of green, and I really like the effect. This whole piece makes me think of landforms, and it's actually connected to the journal piece that I did for the last entry with K3N of K3N clothtales, because I've decided to call it The Land Remembers. Now I don't know if you can see here, because it's not totally clear, and I deliberately made it not totally clear. There's the word the, which I've embroidered in a rust colour, and here I've started to embroider the word land. I did a bit more stitching this morning, so I finished the word land, so it now has the running stitch and then the thread woven through the running stitch to make the whip stitch. So it's clearer to read, but not too clear. You've still got to look fairly closely at it, which I said was my intention. Then if I move the quilt up a bit, you'll see that I still have the tissue on the word remembers, but I have begun putting in the running stitch. Once I've done all the running stitch, I will tear the tissue paper off, and then I'll do the whip stitch. So it's very close to being finished, and I'll show you more soon. excited to show you the next page in the slow stitch journal that I've been working on. As you know, we're doing a project with Catherine Chambers of Ariane Clothtales, and this is my second journal, as you know, and this one in particular actually helped me to know where I was going with my art quilt. And while she was explaining what to do and demonstrating it to us on her channel, she mentioned the word ammonite, and that got me going. So I looked up about ammonites and the fact that they are wonderful fossils with beautiful spiral patterns in them and little chambers inside. And I thought I'll do a simplified version of this. So I just did a whip stitch and then some stab stitch on top of some eco-printed silk. And the leaves on the eco-printed silk are like shadows. And I thought about fossils as well, and how fossils are actually like shadows in stone, because they're a glimpse of the past but not of the real thing. So it's a bit like a shadow, which is a glimpse of what makes the shadow but is not the real thing. And then I thought about the land and how the land often holds so much history in it, including our treatment of it, good or bad, our dwelling on it, and whether we've been good caretakers of it or not, the things that have happened, and all those things. It's like it's in the land, and when you walk in a place, sometimes you can feel something about that place. And I have had that experience. Some people get that in buildings or houses. I've mostly had that in relation to the land. And in fact, in one place I sensed that something really bad had happened without knowing what it was. And when I looked up some history about that particular place, I found out that it had been a place where something very bad had happened. But of course it's also about the good things. So the land has so much beauty. So you can take these shadows in two ways: as something that is sad and even upsetting, but also as something that is beautiful and hopeful. And I think what is done and happens on the land brings a kind of memory to that place. It's quite hard to explain, but I think maybe my little poem explains it better than me trying to explain the poem, if you get what I mean. So here is the little poem that I wrote. And this was in response to the ammonite. So usually I just dip into my journal, my daily writing, and find something that I put with my little stitching piece. But this time I wrote it in response to the piece. Shadows on an ancient land. The land remembers. Now with my art quilt, I didn't know what to name it. I felt that it was topographical, but then I felt maybe it was more than that. So I decided to call it The Land Remembers. And that's why I started to embroider those words onto the surface of the art quilt. And here is the art quilt finished. This is The Land Remembers. I'll just come in a bit closer to it and you'll be able to see the finished lettering. As I said, I didn't want it to be too obvious I wanted it so that you had to look for it and get up close to read it. And I'm very pleased with the results. I'm going to enter this in an exhibition. Not sure which one yet, but I'll have a look around and see what it might suit. So this has been several months in the making, and I'm so pleased to have it finished.